Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this immigration webinar. My name is Susan Kemp. I'm the manager of the Office of International Student Support at OCAD. And we're very pleased to have two immigration law experts with us today, Elizabeth Long and Zia Sumar from the law firm of Long Mongalji in Toronto. They're going to be talking to you today about study permits, working during your studies, the post-graduation work permit, and also options for permanent residence. The session today is being recorded, so you will get a recording of the presentation once it's ready, so just watch your email for that. If you have any friends who couldn't make it today, just let them know that our office will send out the recording to all students so they can watch it later on. We will have a bit of time for questions at the end. So if you think of any questions during the presentation, just use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and then Elizabeth and Zia will address your questions after the presentation. So Elizabeth, I'll hand things over to you to get started.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's great to be here, everyone. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the things that you should really know as international students in Canada. The first thing that we like to talk about is temporary residence. So when you are an international student, later on when you have a work permit, or even if you're a visitor, you have temporary status in Canada. That means that your status ends as stated on your document. So there are a few things that you need to understand before we move on to permanent residence as to what you need to do when you have temporary residence in order to position yourself to be in a good position to apply for permanent residence. Okay, all right, Zia, take it away.
Perfect. So like Elizabeth said, the study permit that you have will have an expiry date on it. And it's really important when you're here in Canada to make sure that you always have temporary status throughout your time here. So one tool and one thing to know, an important concept, is implied or maintained status. Okay, so what this means is that as long as you submit your extension application prior to the expiry of your current permit, then you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status. So this allows you to continue studying and working in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So this is very important, right? Let's take, for example, let's say your study permit is expiring on January 15th, okay? It's important before the 15th that you're submitting your extension application so that you have implied status. Now, IRCC's website says on there that you should be extending your status, so you should be submitting your extension application 30 days prior to the expiry of your permit. The law, however, is that as long as you submit that extension application prior to that expiry date, so prior to the January 15th in our example, you will hold that implied status. You'll be allowed to continue studying here in Canada while you're waiting for that decision on the extension application. However, it's really important that you submit the extension application properly. So if you forget to pay the fees, or if you don't include the application form or your passport, so if you forget a document, then you haven't applied properly. You haven't submitted your extension application properly. And what ends up happening is that your application will get returned, and it's as if you hadn't filed an extension application at all. Now, let's say that happens. Let's say you don't file, you forget the date, right? So January 15th, your permit expires, but you realize on the 16th or the 17th of January that, oh man, I forgot to file my extension application. What happens then? Well, you still have the ability to restore your status. So this means applying to get your status back as a student, okay? Now, generally, the timeline for restoration is that you have 90 days from the day that you have lost your status. So if your permit expired on the 15th, you forgot to submit your application, from that date, you would have 90 days to submit your restoration application, okay? Now, through COVID, IRCC has come out with a special policy to extend that timeline. Okay, so as long as you have submitted, so if you held status on January 30th, sorry, if you lost status on January 30th, 2020, or after, then currently you have until August 31st you had until August 31st of 2021 to submit your restoration application. That policy wasn't extended. And so people who did submit their restoration applications or lost their status had the ability to continue restoring up until August 31st. But now that we're in October, that policy has ended. And so we have gone back now to the regular timelines of 90 days to restore your status.
Okay, so 90 days to restore your status, okay? Now, we're gonna be talking about working in Canada, and I'm going to be telling you about what kind of work you should do to work, okay? Because the work experience that you have in Canada is not just any work experience. Right now, you will see that the system is highly skewed towards high-skilled work versus low-skilled work when we talk about permanent residence, okay? So what's high-skilled and what's low-skilled? Currently, we have a system called the National Occupation Classification Codes, and that's divided into 5 categories. And the NOC codes are O, A, and B are high-skilled, and C and D are low-skilled. So when we talk about permanent residence, you'll see for the most part, the government only allows high-skilled work to count towards qualifications for permanent residence. So things that count in the O, A, and B are high-skilled, and C and D are low-skilled. Now, I did have a meeting with the minister a couple months ago where I asked him, look, this is getting to be pretty ridiculous between high-skilled work and low-skilled work, especially during the pandemic. We see that a lot of work that was deemed to be low-skilled is actually quite essential. The government has recently enacted a temporary policy. It's called the TR to PR policy, which allowed people who had certain essential skills. It doesn't matter, a lot of them were low skilled, in the low skilled category, to apply for permanent residence. And I asked him, do you think that this is you're going to have more programs like this? And he said, likely. So, more to come. What we tell you today is true today, but in immigration, every time I do these webinars, and we've been doing these webinars for OCAD for a couple of years, every time I come here, a lot of things will have changed. Next year, it's supposed to be NOC 2021. It hasn't really been released yet, but the new NOC that is coming into place is going to completely change this whole high-skilled versus low-skilled work experience into tiers, 6 tiers. Now, likely they might still classify 4 of those tiers to be high-skilled and 2 of those tiers to be low-skilled, depending. What they call low-skilled or high-skilled is normally work that they think requires some sort of post-secondary training and work that doesn't. But we'll see how it goes. So stay tuned for this. We're going to be registering you guys on newsletters for us. And whenever these kind of changes come through, the only way for us to reach you guys is to send you news through our newsletters. Okay, so more to come on that. All right, Zia.
So on that study permit, right, we talked about the fact that there's an expiry date listed on there, but there's also conditions that are implied onto that study permit that aren't as obvious. One of them is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. So while you're here in Canada, it is required that you are making progress towards the completion of your program. That's called actively pursuing your studies. If you stop studying, so let's say you finish your program early, or you decide that you no longer want to study, and so you leave the program entirely, you lose your status within 90 days of stopping those studies, right? So the condition is you have to be actively pursuing your studies. If you decide to stop studying, then that status as a student is lost within 90 days from the date that you stop studying. There are two exceptions to this. The two exceptions are if you're on a scheduled break or an authorized leave. What are these though? So a scheduled break is a break that's in the academic calendar for your program. So it's not a break that you decide to take on your own. You can't decide, okay, for someone who has, let's say, a 2-year program without any summer breaks, you can't decide that, okay, I want to take a summer break, so I'm going to just not register in courses for the summer. That's not a regularly scheduled break, okay? The IRCC refers back to the school and to the academic calendar for your program to determine what is and what is not a regularly scheduled break. The second exception is for an authorized leave. So these are special circumstances in which your school has granted you a leave from your studies. It can be for a variety of reasons. For example, you have you need to take a break for medical reasons, or you have family members that need assistance, whatever it may be. The school has to approve the leave for it to be considered an authorized leave from your studies. Okay, so very important. If you do need to take an authorized leave, make sure that you do keep a record of that approval, that you have proof that you let the school know and that was authorized. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that generally on a study permit, part of it is that usually the route for international students is that you want to get your postgrad work permit so you can get the work experience and qualify for permanent residence. But generally studying outside of Canada online can be problematic towards that. However, again, because of COVID, we are seeing special policies in place. So if currently your classes are online, anytime between spring 2020 up to the end of this year, so December 31st, 2021, you would still remain eligible for the postgrad work permit. So those online courses that you're doing right now, they don't jeopardize your ability to qualify for the postgrad work permit. With that being said, there can be issues, or there may be issues with qualifying for express entry points, for the CRS points for education in Canada, for those individuals who have been studying online and outside of Canada. But Elizabeth will touch on that more when we look at express entry in the point system. The last thing on study permits, an important part of it, is that it does allow you to work. It does allow some students to work off campus during your program. So if you hold a study permit, you're here studying in Canada, that study permit allows full-time students, okay, it is very important, full-time students to work off campus. The rule is that during your semester, you're able to work up to 20 hours a week off campus and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. Okay, so again, we see a distinction between when you're studying and when you're on a break. And again, the rule is only for full-time students. So the ability to work off campus on your study permit is limited to those that are studying full-time. Exception here again is if you are in your last semester. So if in your final semester of your program, you only need to take a part-time course load, you can still continue to work off campus part-time as well. So you can still continue that 20 hours a week. Now, once you have completed your studies, so once you've received any written confirmation from the school that you have finished the requirements of your program, that ability to work on your study permit ends. Okay, so that part-time work that you could do, that has to stop as soon as you receive any written confirmation. That can be a letter from the school, your final grades, your final transcripts, anything that indicates to you that you have completed your program of study. That means you're no longer a student, and that means you do have to stop working. Now, let's say you're not applying for your postgrad work permit. Instead, you're looking at doing another program after you finished your first program. So you're done your first program, you received your letter from the school saying you're done, and you've already been accepted into a second program. Well, as long as the period of time between the two programs is 150 days or less, you can begin working full-time once you've received that written confirmation that you've completed your program. So while you're in between your two programs, you do have the ability to work full-time as long as you hold a valid study permit or have applied for your extension, you've received written confirmation from your school that you finished your first program, and you have already been accepted into the second program of study.
Okay, so just wanted to reiterate, when you guys finish your studies, that's when you guys get your first notification from the school that you've completed your program. At that time, are you a full-time student? No, you're not. Okay, so at that time, you have to stop working. We get this issue all the time from students because you think, oh, you know, I'm still a student. No, I haven't. You still have to stop working then. When can you start working again? Well, that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so post-grad work permits are golden tickets. Okay, you only get, why do I say they're golden tickets? Well, first of all, they are open work permits. They allow you to work anywhere you want. They are also golden tickets because you can actually get them. Okay, most of the time for someone to get a work permit in Canada, it's not very easy. Most of the time, the employer, you have to find an employer who's willing to do a LMIA. They have to show they cannot find any Canadians to do the job. There are a few other categories as well, but for the most part, most people will find it very difficult, if not impossible, to get a work permit. However, as international students, you guys can get this work permit, but you can only qualify for one golden ticket in your lifetime. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, first of all, immigration, the success to immigration really depends on planning. Okay, you have to have a plan, and you guys, I'm preaching to the choir because you guys are already on it, because you guys are here. You guys are thinking, okay, I need to see what I need to do, right? Fantastic. For your friends who aren't here, you might want to let them know, okay? But the thing about the postgrad work permits is the length of the program length of your program will determine how many years on the postgrad work permit you have. So if you have anything from 8 months to 2 years, you'll get it from the date, the amount of the program. And then anything over 2 years, you get 3-year work permit. Now, when I say the length of the program, I'm talking about academic years. It's not necessarily calendar months. Okay, so for example, most 1-year programs will be 8 months, 2 semesters in calendar months. Okay, but there'll be a 1 academic year. Many programs that are 2 years will be 16 months, right? 4 academic semesters, but there will be 2 academic years. So if you are in a situation where you have a 1-year program, when you graduate, you will only get a 1-year work permit. That may not, it's not for some people can do it, but that for a lot of people may not be enough time for you to get the work experience needed in order to get permanent residence. Okay, so what can you do if you're in that situation? Well, you can do another program. So if you do 1 year, one program, and then you finish another program, another 1-year program that is completed within 2 years of the first program. Okay, so let's say you finish one program and then you have a summer break, which you can work if you're accepted to the second program, and then you do another 1-year program. You can combine those two. 1 + 1 does not equal 2. 1 + 1 equals 3-year work permit. Okay. All right. So another very important thing about the postgrad work permit, and it's one of the biggest disappointments I see, is that sometimes people don't understand that in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit, you have to study as a full-time student. We see a lot of people getting rejections on their applications because the officer didn't think that they were a full-time student throughout the entirety of their program. Okay. This is super important because if you are part-time, and it shows on the transcripts that you're only a part-time student, even in 1 semester, the officer will reject your application. So, you know, sometimes I have people coming to me and saying, okay, well, Elizabeth, I'm having some health issues, or I'm just, you know, my family has some issues. I just can't do a full-time course load in this 1 semester. What should I do? Well, what I say is, you know what? Take the entire semester off, go to your school and ask for authorized leave. So you can take an entire semester off, okay, and ask for authorized leave, and then come back, and then you will still be okay. Okay. So that's one thing. It's much better to do it that way than if you do part-time, because you won't get your postgrad work permit at the end. Sometimes the officers may make some exceptions for some things. When your transcript is complicated, it doesn't show everything, or if you fail some courses, or you may want to hire a lawyer to help you explain your situation to the officer so that they might consider giving you the postgrad work permit at the end. Okay, there is a recognized exception for the final semester. The IRCC recognizes that sometimes, you know, someone might just need to do 1 last course in the last semester. You are okay to do that and be a part-time student in the final semester. If you're a part-time student in the final semester, you can actually work full-time during that semester, only if you're a part-time student in the final semester. Okay, now, when should you apply for the postgrad work permit? This is very, very important, guys. You have to stop working as soon as you get notice from the school that you've stopped working, you've finished your program. Okay, what kind of notice is it? It's not when you get your degree. Okay, I'll guarantee you that it's not, because that comes months, it may come in weeks or whatever. Okay, the first notification you might get, maybe something comes through your portal, your account, maybe you get an email, maybe you get the completion letter, maybe you get the transcript. Any one of those, the earliest of any of those is your notification. From that date, mark it on your calendar. You have 90 days to apply for your postgrad work permit. Okay, some smart people might say to me, okay, Elizabeth, you say 90 days, but the IRCC website says 180 days. So what's going on there? Okay, the reason why I say 90 days is it goes back to the previous slide that Zia was talking about. You lose your status 90 days after you finish your studies, after you become no longer a full-time student. From the 90 to 180, if you go and apply there, you will have lost your status. You have to file a restoration of status for your study permit. It's a mess, okay? IRCC put it there to kind of allow for second chances for people who might have forgotten to apply within 90 days or had it rejected and do it that way. But you don't want to get yourself into that situation, because a second reason why is because you want to start working as soon as you've applied for your work permit, right? Right now in Niagara, people used to be able to go to the Niagara region, do a what we call a flagpole, go to the US, come back at the border and come back and apply. But right now, because since COVID started, Niagara is not allowing people to do that. So most people apply online, okay? If you're applying online, the waiting time is around 3 months, 4 months, 2 months, whatever it is. You might have a job offer before then, and you might want to start working, okay? So if you apply, here is the deadline, okay? If you apply before your study permit expires and within the 90 days, whichever comes first. If your study permit expires before 90 days, that's your deadline. If your study permit expires after the 90 days, 90 days is your deadline. If you apply before then, you can start working while waiting for your work permit. If you don't apply before that deadline, then you cannot work. You have to stop working and file the restoration of status, and you might get your post-grad work permit if you do it within 180 days. Okay, so deadline is what? 90 days or the expiry date of your study permit, whichever comes first. By the way, guys, I see some people are putting things on the Q&A. Fantastic. If you have more questions, put it in there. We'll be going over some of your questions at the end, okay? All right, let's move on to permanent residence. The first one that I'm going to talk to you guys about is express entry. A lot of you might have already heard about express entry. It is one of the most popular applications to do. It's not the only one. You know, we'll be talking about various ones, including one especially for artists that I love to present to you guys at OCAD. Okay, but the first one we're going to talk about is express entry. And I'm going to, you know, give you a outline of how this system works. So first of all, to apply through express entry, you have to create an online profile. You qualify for the online profile through one of 3 categories: Federal Skilled Worker, Canadian Experience Class, or Federal Skilled Trades Class. If you qualify, you can get into the pool. But just because you got into the pool does not mean that you have applied for permanent residence. A lot of people think, oh, I've applied for permanent residence because I'm in the pool. No, 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 no. You haven't applied yet. You have just shown the government that you're a candidate and you're interested in applying, okay? Because you can stay in the pool and after a year, your profile will expire, okay? The trick is not just to get into the pool. Every couple of weeks or so, the government will have a draw where they base it on the category that you belong to and your score, okay? And you're gonna get a score based on your background and also if you have provincial nomination. And then if your score and your category, it meets the draw line, then you will get an invitation to apply. It's only after you get the invitation to apply can you actually submit your application and apply for permanent residence. All right, so let's take it a little bit slower. First of all, what do you need to do in order to get into the pool? The first category that many of you may already qualify for is the Federal Skilled Worker class. In order to qualify for this, you have to have 1 year of high skilled, NOC O, A, and B, continuous, no breaks in between, full-time, classified as 30 hours a week, or 1,560 hours together, okay? Of at least 1 year, right? 1 year high skilled post and 1 occupation. So that 1 year 1,560 hours. You can do part-time, let's say 2 years of 15 hours a week. You can add that together, but it all has to be continuous in one occupation that's high skilled. Okay. After you have that work experience, you also have to have the Ielts of 6.0 or CELPIP of 7.0, 7 or French. So most of you shouldn't have any issues since you're going to OCAD. Okay. You also have to have, well, do a scoring. This is not the express entry score. This is a federal skilled worker score of your background to see whether or not you have enough points. Most of you, if you have that 1 year of work experience and you're at OCAD, should meet that. And then one last thing is you will need to have savings, approximately around 13,000 Canadian dollars for one person. If you have more family members that who are your dependents and who are getting permanent residence, you're adding, a couple thousand for each person. Okay. Now, the federal skilled worker class before COVID used to have regular draws. But since COVID started, they haven't been inviting too many people. In fact, in this year, they haven't had any draws yet for the federal skilled worker class. I think they're thinking that a lot of people, if you're under this class, might be applying from overseas, and they don't necessarily want to encourage too many people to come to Canada at this point from outside of Canada. So they're concentrating on people who are in Canada who have the work experience in Canada. And that's where we get to the Canadian experience class. So the Canadian experience class is a very, very different kind of criteria from the first one, okay? Canadian experience class, the work experience you need has to be in Canada when you are not a full-time student. So this is really when you get your postgrad work permit and you're working then, and it has to be high skilled, and you have to be employed. The first one, federal skilled worker, you can have the work experience when you're a student. You can have the work experience, outside of Canada. You can have the work experience if you're self-employed. But the Canadian experience, work experience, you have to be employed. Okay, it has to be 1 year. It doesn't have to be continuous. It could be in different occupations in Canada after you're a student, but you have to be employed. The employment part is something that I do find could be of issue to a lot of people who are in the arts, who, the occupation may normally not be something where you would be employed. You may normally want to be self-employed. Okay, so in this kind of case, you would fall more into the federal skilled worker class and not the Canadian experience class, which requires employment, T4, having your income tax remitted, and having that employer-employee relationship. We're going to be talking about other ways to apply for permanent residence if you're not employed, and that's where the self-employed artist category comes in. I'm not going to go into the skilled trades category because I don't think that's applicable to you guys. All right, so let's talk about the points that you're going to get once you're in the pool. Okay, what gives you points? Well, the first thing is age. Unfortunately, after you turn your 30th birthday, it's no longer going to be happy birthdays. Okay, because every year that you get older after the at the age of 30 and more, it drops 5-6 points in your 30s. 40s is like a fast slide, minus 10, minus 11. By the time you're 45, the good thing is it doesn't drop anymore, but the age points are 0. Okay, not a lot you can do about age, except don't delay. Apply when you can. Okay, education is important. So if you have 2 degrees or you finish 2 post-secondary programs where one program is at least 3 years in length, or if you have a master's, that really bumps you up with your points. Language is also quite important. we're often looking at Ielts. If you don't have any work experience in Canada, you have to qualify under the skilled worker class. We're looking at Ielts of at least 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening, or CELPIP of 9 in everything. Okay. Relevant Canadian work experience. Again, this is the same work experience as the Canadian experience class work experience. You can only get these points if you are employed in Canada. Foreign work experience, we can count self-employed foreign work experience if you've been in high skilled work outside of Canada in the last 10 years. Spouse, we can add a few points for spouses. Provincial nominee program, that is express entry linked. Zia is going to go through this with you for Ontario. Okay, so if you are able to get a provincial nomination that is an express entry linked provincial nomination, then you will get 600 points added to your points, which assures you to get an invitation to apply. If you've studied in Canada, lucky you guys. If you've done a master's or a 3-year program, then it's going to be 30 points. 1 or 2 year programs that are not graduate based, that's going to be 15 points each. Okay. Arranged employment. A lot of people think, oh, I have a job offer, therefore I get the arranged employment points, right? No. These arranged employment points are only for people who have employer-specific work permits or LMIAs. It's not for people who have open work permits like the Postgrad work permit. If you have siblings who are Canadians or permanent residents, you'll get some points. Fluency in French is big. So if you are fluent in French, if you can pass the French exam, then you will get significant points as well. Trade certification, that's more with the trades. It's not really relevant to you guys. Okay, so that's the system. Now, some of you, when you're looking at this, you might think, I'm pretty good. I'm in a good position. Other people who look at this may be like, you might not feel so good. Okay, so don't worry. We're going to talk about other things that you can do. All right.
Perfect. So the express entry streams, the 3 streams that Elizabeth just spoke to, those are federal programs. Okay, those are programs that are Canada-wide. Comparatively, there are also provincial nominee programs. So programs that are specific to a particular province that you're applying through. So what we're going to look at today is Ontario's programs. Okay, when we're talking about Ontario and specifically the Ontario provincial nominee programs, the way that you can think about it is breaking it down between the streams that are express entry based and those that are non-express entry based. So because Elizabeth just spoke about all the express entry streams, we're going to start there. Okay, so in Ontario, we have 3 express entry based streams for the provincial program here. Now, before we can talk about applying through the program, before we can even look at the program requirements for Ontario's streams, the first step, okay, when we're talking about applying, is that you have to be in the federal express entry pool. Okay, so going through the process that Elizabeth just spoke to, looking at those eligibility criteria and being in IRCC's express entry pool is the first step. What Ontario does from there is they go into the express entry pool and they filter it down to people who meet Ontario's criteria, which we'll talk about in a moment. But basically they take that large express entry pool and they filter it down to candidates who meet Ontario's specific requirements. And then from there, they do draws and issue notifications of interest. So if you get a notification of interest from Ontario, that's the point in time when you can actually prepare and submit your provincial nominee application. Okay, Ontario then assesses the application. If they approve it, then for one of these streams is where you would get the 600 points that Elizabeth just spoke about. So let's take a look at the categories. So the first one is the human capital priority stream. Okay, in the human capital priority stream, requirements are work experience, savings, language. But one of the biggest differences that we see with the human capital priority stream is that you need to have at least a bachelor's degree or higher. Okay, so there is a minimum education component that is higher than the federal streams that we've just spoken to. Okay, so it's a bachelor's degree or higher. It doesn't necessarily have to be completed in Canada, but if it is done outside of Canada, then you do have to have an educational credential assessment. Now, with the human capital priority stream, what Ontario has been doing is, so they go into the express entry pool like we talked about. They distill it down to a smaller group of people who meet the criteria for the human capital priority stream, but then they take it one step further and they do what are called, they've been doing tech draws and other draws. Okay, so priority occupation draws this year. And these are focused on particular occupations. Like you can expect when we're talking about tech draws, they're looking at tech-based occupations. So your software programmer, your software engineer, they fall under your tech draws. But Ontario has also been doing other draws that include specific occupations, and these do change. Okay, so it does change based on their draws, based on what Ontario has identified as being in need here. Now, so we know that they're doing draws, we know that they're looking at occupations, they're also looking at CRS scores. Okay, so with the human capital priority stream for 2021, so for this year, the lowest score that they've drawn for is 453. Okay, so we look at eligibility criteria, we look at occupations, and we're also looking at CRS scores for the human capital priority stream. The second category is for French-speaking skilled workers. Okay, so this is for individuals who are proficient in both French and in English. Okay, so you have to have at least a CLB level of 7 in all areas of that French language test and 6 in all areas of the English language test. Okay, and again here the education requirement is a bachelor's degree or higher. With the French-speaking draws, Ontario has not limited in terms of occupations, but they are also limiting in terms of the CRS scores. So again, when they're going into the pool, they're looking for people who meet the criteria for the French-speaking skilled worker, and they're also limiting the notifications of interest that they send out based on CRS points as well. And the reason that they're doing all of this is that Ontario can only issue a certain number. They have a maximum number of nominations that they can issue in a year. And so the way that they limit each category is by looking also at the CRS scores. The last category under the express entry stream is the skilled trade stream. For this program, I'm not going to talk about too much about it, but you do have to be in Ontario with a valid work permit. Now, with the skilled trade stream, we do have an occupation list. So you do need to have at least 1 year of work experience in Ontario in one of the specified trades for this program, and that work experience does have to be within the past 2 years. Okay, so those are the express entry streams for Ontario. Okay, the next major category that you can think about when you're thinking about these programs is Ontario's non-express entry streams. Okay, and in the non-express entry programs, you have those that are employer-based and those that are non-employer-based. All of these, though, go through this a new expression of interest system. So this is new for 2021. And the way that the expression of interest system works is that when you qualify for any of these non-express entry streams, your first step is to create a profile in Ontario's portal, okay? And that puts you into a pool of candidates for your specific program. Ontario then goes into the pool every so often. There's no set schedule. They do not announce this in advance, but they go into the pool and they do a draw. Okay, so in the pool for your stream, you get a score, and based on the score, again, you're ranked against everyone else. And then Ontario does a draw. They have a minimum score. The individuals that have a score above that minimum score get an invitation to apply to Ontario's non-express entry-based stream. Once you have submitted your application, you've applied, Ontario processes it, they issue your new nomination certificate. You can then apply for permanent residence. but very important to understand that this is not express entry. So we're not getting an additional 600 points in the express entry pool. For this application, once you have your nomination, you're applying for permanent residence directly to IRCC without touching express entry. Okay, and the biggest difference with these streams is that this second stage for your permanent residence is a lot longer than going through express entry. Okay, so you do have to be a little bit more patient with that permanent residence process when you're applying for the non-express entry streams. So let's look at the requirements. So when we're talking about the employer-based streams, there are 3 categories, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But in all of these categories, there are requirements on the employer. Okay, and the employer requirements are the same throughout all of them. So the employer needs to have been in business for at least 3 years. Okay, so they have to have been in operation in Ontario for at least 3 years. Now, if the employer is inside of the Greater Toronto Area, then they do have to have grossed at least $1 million in the past fiscal year, and they have to have at least 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees at the time of your application. Okay. Comparatively, if the employer is outside of the Greater Toronto Area, then those 2 figures go down. The gross income decreases to $500,000 in the past fiscal year, and they need to only have 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees at the time of your application. Okay. There are requirements also on the job offer that they're giving you. So the position that they're offering does have to be both full-time and a permanent job offer. Okay, so it can't be a contract for a year. It does have to be permanent, which means that it's indefinite. There's no end date on that contract. So let's look a little closely now at the 3 different programs. So the first one under the employer-based stream is for international students, international graduates. You have to apply within 2 years of completing your program here. Okay. Now, when we're looking at what programs qualify, this is also very important to understand. Either you've done a 2-year program or you've completed a 1-year postgraduate program from a public university or college. When we're looking at postgraduate programs, they do have to have a degree as an admission requirement. So it can't be a degree or work experience. It has to be a degree specifically for admission into that postgraduate program. With the job offer stream for the international students, the job offer does have to be high skilled, but the wage that's being offered to you can be entry level. Okay, you'll see when we talk about the next stream, the foreign skilled worker stream, it's a little bit higher, but for the international student stream, the minimum wage that's being offered, and it is dependent on the occupation and on the location, but it is at the entry level. Comparatively, we have the skilled worker stream. This is the second one under the employer-based programs. For this program, you don't have to, there's no education component to it, there's no language component to it, but there is a work experience component. So you need to have at least 2 years of work experience in the same occupation as the position being offered to you. And that work experience has to have been within the past 5 years from the date of your application. Okay, that's one of the biggest criteria for this particular stream of the Ontario program, is that you have to have 2 years of work experience, right? When we talked about the international student stream, there was no work experience requirement, okay? But for the skilled worker stream, you have to have at least 2 years. Again, the job offer has to be high skilled, but here the wage that's being offered to you has to meet the median or the prevailing wage. And so entry-level wage would not suffice for this particular stream. Lastly, under the employer-based stream, you have the in-demand occupations. Okay, so here, Ontario has a specific list of occupations that fall under the in-demand stream. Okay, so the position that you're being offered has to be on that list. And additionally, you have to have at least 9 months of work experience in that occupation and in Ontario specifically. Okay, the wage again here is the median or the prevailing level wage. Now, with the non-express entry streams, okay, so these are the employer-based programs. There's also programs that don't require a job offer. Okay, so these are for master's and PhD graduates. Okay, you do have to apply within 2 years of your graduation. So these are two different streams. You have your master's graduate stream and your PhD graduate stream. Okay, the requirement is that you do apply within 2 years. There is no job offer requirement, but there is a minimum savings requirement. Very similar to the federal skilled worker program. This is dependent on the size of your family. Okay, so depending on how many immediate family members fall into your family, that savings requirement will change, will vary. An important criteria for both the master's and the PhD stream is that you have to be ready to, your intent is to live and work in Ontario, right? Because this is a provincial program, they are looking specifically for individuals that have declared an intent to remain in Ontario. And further than that, you can't be looking to do any further studies. Okay, so let's say you finished your master's program and you're thinking about doing a PhD. If you've already been accepted and enrolled or are doing a PhD, then you would not be able to apply through the master's stream. Okay, and like I said earlier, both the master's and PhD stream fall under the new expression of interest system. And so basically, once you qualify, you create your profile, you go into a pool, and then Ontario does specific draws for both of these streams.
Let me unmute myself there. All right, guys. So let's talk about one more category for you guys. And this is, as promised, the self-employed category for artists. So if you've looked at this, and some of you may very well be good candidates for the previous applications, but for those people who are really self-employed, have been self-employed, and will likely plan to be self-employed, this might be the right category for you. So Canada does have something for artists who have been self-employed or have been participating at a world-class level for at least 2 years in the last 5 years, okay? Who in your art, okay? So you've been able to sustain yourself being self-employed artist for the last at least 2 years in the last 5 years. And very important, you can show that you will be able to support yourself and make a significant contribution to cultural life in Canada. Okay, so if you've been able to be self-employed and you can show that you will be able to be self-employed in Canada, then you could qualify under this category. Okay, now how do you show this? First of all, you guys are in a good position in Canada because you can actually work in Canada right now. So if you can show that you have potential work in Canada and that you've been able to earn money and that you will be able to earn money, that's great. We also tend to get a lot of supporting evidence from colleagues, from prominent people in the field, from your work and your portfolio to show how much contribution you will be able to provide to Canada. Okay, now the processing time for you have to meet 35 points in the selection criteria. Most of you will have no problems meeting that. Now the processing time for this used to be very fast, within a year. Now it's stretched on to be longer, but at least you can submit your application for this. And if you needed to get a work permit afterwards, we could always apply for another work permit after your post-grad work permit, for significant benefit, what we call significant benefit work permit. Okay. Okay, so next steps. After hearing all about this, what should you guys be doing? Okay. So
the first thing is have a plan, right? So know what you need to do to meet your immigration goals. And I think being here today is an important part of that, right? You need to understand what the programs are, how you can qualify, right? Make sure that so this is the first step, knowing the general programs, knowing what is out there and what the options potentially are. But from there, the next thing is to understand how they apply to you, right? Understand which ones you qualify for and what's your best route to obtaining permanent residence if that's your goal.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing today is just giving you a general sort of outline of what's out there. It's not really specific advice to you guys because the amount of law that is out there in immigration is really staggering, and it's not possible for us to cover everything that's pertaining to you specifically. But it's very important that you get personal advice and do a consultation to understand how it pertains to you. Okay. Once you know what you need to do, you actually need to be determined to do it. Maybe you need to study for the Ielts again, okay? Maybe you need to do another program in order to get the postgrad work permit. Whatever it is that you need to do, you have to figure it out and see if immigrating to Canada is your number one priority. You need to make sure that you actually do it.
And then, of course, make sure you stay in status while you're here in Canada. Okay, so we talked about this in the beginning. Really important that while you're here, you're always maintaining your temporary residence in your status. The other part of that is when you're applying, very important to not misrepresent yourself, right? So a lot of times people will come and say, oh, my previous consultant told me to write that I worked for 10 years on my application, even though I hadn't. Well, that's called misrepresenting, right? So that's called when you put information down on your application that isn't true, basically what you're doing is you're misrepresenting yourself on your application, and that carries very significant penalties with it. If IRCC makes a finding of misrepresentation, it can carry with it a 5-year ban from applying for any immigration programs. And even after that 5-year ban, it's definitely much, much more difficult to try and apply at that point for any type of application.
Another form of misrepresentation we see is a lot of it is inadvertent. People don't realize who their common law partner is, right? So in Canada, under immigration laws, and most Canadians don't even know what that is, okay? But under immigration laws, if you have been living with someone in a conjugal relationship, okay, not roommates, okay, but in a conjugal relationship for at least 1 year, then that person is your common law partner. Okay, I don't care how committed you are to that person or whatever, that person is your family. And when you apply for anything, your work permit, study permit, permanent residence, they will ask you, what is your marital status? And under that will be common law. So if you have a common law partner, you must declare that person as your common law partner. That person may or may not be added to your application as a dependent. If you don't want them to, you don't have to, but you must declare them. Finally, if your application is rejected, okay, contact a lawyer right away. A lot of people think, oh, you know what? I'm just going to call the call center at IRCC, okay? IRCC has a call center, but the officers are not like an Amazon representative, okay? They don't really have your best interests in mind. They might be very nice, okay? They might give you all sorts of advice. A lot of it will be wrong, okay? And every time you call them, it may go into your file. So don't go and rely on calling the call center. If you call the call center, if your application is rejected, they might tell you, oh, just write a letter to us and explain, or I'll put a note in your file and then explain, okay? If you do that and the officer because you don't really know exactly how to, comply with the law and write according to what the law requires. And the officer says, no, I don't want to. Okay. Then you come to someone like us and you say, oh, you know what do I do now? You may be out of time, first of all, to go to federal court. Federal court notice is 15 days if you applied inside Canada from the date of the decision, or outside of Canada, 60 days. Okay. And you file reconsideration, you don't get another reconsideration. So if you come to us, you write a letter, that's considered a reconsideration. They say no. I can't then write another letter to immigration because they say, oh, you already had you only get one kick at the can and you had your chance, and we're not going to even look at what you're submitting. Okay, so don't try to do it yourself. Contact a lawyer right away. I wouldn't advise anyone to do any of it by yourself. It's kind of like, you kind of think about it as someone running through a dynamite factory with a lit match, right? You might get through it okay, but anywhere you can spark something. It's not smart to do that. Okay. So that's it for us in terms of the presentation. Just wanted to let you know this is our contact information. If you do want to book a personal consultation with us, let us know that you've attended this webinar, you're from OCAD, and we will offer you the discount for the consultation. Okay. All right. Let's go through some questions. We've got some great questions here. Zia, on a scheduled break, can we enter and exit the country if we have to? Will that affect our status on the study permit?
Yeah, you certainly can exit and travel and re-enter Canada. You do want to keep in mind if you need a visa or an ETA to make sure that that's valid, because you will need that for your re-entry. The only note I'll make here is if you're on implied status, so basically if you're between, like you've applied for an extension, you haven't received a decision, then you may have difficulty re-entering. You won't be able to re-enter Canada and continue studying. And so that would be the only point in time where I would say no, stay put until you have that extension application approved. But otherwise, if you hold a valid study permit and you have either your ETA or your visa, whichever you need, then yes, you can certainly travel. Okay, Liz, question for you. Talking about visas, the new visa I received, so I applied for a visa extension. The new visa I received is coded V1 for visitor, whereas my previous one was S1 for student. What does that mean? And what's the effect of it?
Right. So it may be really confusing for a lot of people because they changed the rules during COVID. Before, if you apply for a study permit and you need a visa to come to Canada, you'll get an S1 visa, which adheres to the S study permit. If you have a work permit, you get a W visa, and you can't enter the Canada on a work permit or study permit if you don't have the corresponding visas. However, during COVID, they have said, no, you know what? It doesn't matter what kind of visa you have. Okay. Even if you have a visitor visa, you can still enter the country. Let me just, it can be a little bit confusing for people as to what a visa is. A visa is only required for certain people. A lot of nationals from different countries don't need a visa. Americans don't need a visa. If you're from UK, you don't need a visa, okay? Visas for visa requiring countries, if you're from India, if you're from China, you need a visa to enter Canada. That is only pertaining to your entry to Canada. It doesn't in and of itself give you status. What gives you status is your study permit. So let's say you got a visa for 10 years. It doesn't mean you can stay in Canada for 10 years. It means you can enter Canada during the 10 years. But how long you can stay in Canada depends on your status documents. If you're a visitor, default, you can stay in Canada for 6 months normally if there's no other conditions. If you're a student, you stay according to your study permit. When that expires, your status in Canada has expired. Okay, Next, do the part-time work hours done while studying in Canada count for the permanent residency application?
So depends. I mean, for the federal skilled worker, if you're trying to qualify under the federal skilled worker program, then yes, you can use your part-time hours. Keep in mind that your work experience does have to be continuous and within a single occupation. But if we're talking about the Canadian Experience Class program, then no, you cannot use work experience that you've done while you were a full-time student towards Canadian Experience Class work experience. When we're also looking at the CRS points, so points for Canadian work experience on the CRS system, you don't get any points for any work experience you've done while you're a full-time student. Okay, next, Elizabeth, can I bring my spouse when I'm working on a post-grad work permit?
Yes, you can if you have a high skilled job. Okay, if you're working in a low skilled position, they will not be eligible for a spousal work permit. They may be able to be here as a visitor, but if you have a high skilled job and you have your postgrad work permit, then they're eligible to apply for an open spousal work permit to work as well in Canada. Okay. The 90 days, I think this is pertaining to the postgrad work permit. The 90 days, is that based on the graduation day or the day we finish our final semester?
Great question. So usually the graduation date is much later, so we don't look at that. We're basically looking for the earliest indication that you've completed your program of study. So that can be your final grades being released, a final transcript, a letter from the school, anything that indicates to you that you've completed your program of study. Now, if your final grades are released and you decide not to check them, then that does not mean that your 90 days has not started. Okay, so you can't just say, I don't want to see them, I don't want to know, I want that 90 days to start later. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. It's really the earliest that any indication could have been given to you. So when your final grades are received, when that final letter is sent out, that's when your 90 days starts. Elizabeth, if I take winter 2020 term courses, January to April online outside of Canada, would there be a problem with my study permit?
So there's no issue with your study permit. You can do what you like with your study permit. You can study outside Canada, that's fine. The problem is do you want the postgrad work permit? And I'm assuming yes, okay. If you study outside of Canada, the government hasn't made an announcement yet for the January start date. It could be that they're extending their policy to allow students to study outside of Canada for the and still qualify for the postgrad work permit, but they haven't announced it yet. I'm going to assume if they haven't announced it that you aren't allowed to do that. So if they're not allowed to do that, then to qualify for your postgrad work permit, you need to be in Canada to study. There's another thing that I like to mention is that, you know how you can get 30 points or 15 points, depending on your program, for studying in Canada? Well, that requires you to be in Canada for 8 months. That's the regulations, and they haven't changed that yet. So that could be a consideration because you probably will want to have those points for express entry as well. A lot of people say, oh, I just want to be, close to my family and do that. You need to consider whether or not you want to get permanent residence and your chances of permanent residence. This is one of the reasons why it's important to get a consultation from a good lawyer to see what exactly you need to do. It affects everything from the date that you start with your studies, okay? Susan or Lee, I don't know if you wanted to answer this question. Someone has asked, are we going to get assistance from the university through this process?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so my office, the international office, we have staff who are authorized to provide advice on study permits, working during your studies, and the post-graduation work permit. We're not able to assist you with PR applications, though. So anything related to PR, you would need to contact an immigration lawyer for assistance with that.
Great, thank you. Okay, Zia, do you, this person asked, do you have to take a certain amount of courses to qualify as a full-time student? Or maybe
Yes.
actually, maybe Susan might be able to answer that. What qualifies as a full-time student at OCAD?
Yeah, so at OCAD, if you're an undergraduate student in a bachelor's program, you need to take a minimum of 1.5 credits in each of the fall and winter terms. If you're a graduate student in a master's program, then you need to be enrolled in a full-time graduate program. So we don't look at the number of credits, but you need to have been admitted to and be enrolled in a full-time graduate program.
That's great. Okay. Zia, by one occupation, do you mean that we need to have 1 year of work experience with the same employer? I think this is when we're talking about the skilled worker, federal skilled worker.
Yeah, for the federal skilled worker program, no, it doesn't have to be with the same employer, but it does have to be continuous. So basically, when you're stopping with one employer, you want to be starting right away with the next employer, right? That's what we mean by continuous. One occupation means that you're always working in the same occupation. So let's say you're working as, if you're working as an administrative assistant, for example, both those positions with both the employers would have to be that same, would have to fall within the same occupation code. So yes, you can switch between employers, but your responsibilities have to be largely the same. You have to fall within the same NOC code. Elizabeth, the next question's for you. Is there a possibility of entering Canada from a land border in the US for the first time? Or is it mandatory to enter by air?
No, absolutely. You can enter from the US. Any of the port of entries, what we call port of entries, land borders or airplanes, you can certainly get your study permit there. Does family only mean immediate family?
Yeah, so when we're talking about family for the purposes of immigration, you're looking at your spouse and dependent children. So dependent children are anyone under the age of 22 and not married. That falls under your immediate family.
Okay.
Elizabeth, for CC, do you have to take, or for any of the immigration programs, can you do the academic Ielts?
No academic. You have to redo it to do the Ielts General, or you can do the CELPIP General. For French, you can do the TCF or the TEF Canada, TCF Canada or TEF Canada. It's very, very specific on the kind of test that you do. Any TOEFL or any other test, we don't, the IRCC doesn't consider. Okay, but if you've had experience doing IELTS academic, then IELTS General, they say it's easier than academic.
And your results are valid for 2 years.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Does tech draws include UX designer position?
Yeah, so the Oimp tech draws do have the occupations of software engineers, designers, computer programmers. All of those do fall under the tech draw. It just depends specifically on your responsibilities in that role. Elizabeth, can we apply to both Express Entry and Ontario's Expression of Interest system at the same time?
Yes, you can. You can do both in parallel, and some people do to maximize their chances. When you say apply, again, with the Express Entry, when you enter the pool, you haven't applied. With the Ontario, when you get just into the profile, you haven't applied yet. Okay, it's only after you get the invitation to apply or expression of interest from the government can you actually submit your application. Now you can also submit your application to both streams, and And, you only get one PR in the end, but you can certainly file these in parallel.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction, is that creating your profile is not an application. It's basically saying you're interested in applying to these programs. With Ontario, they have multiple streams that fall under the EOI system, right? So we saw the master's, we saw the employer-based stream, we saw the PhD streams. If you qualify for multiple of these streams, you're creating multiple profiles, right? And so you can be in multiple streams in Ontario's portal as well. But like Elizabeth said, you're only going to get PR once.
Okay, I think that answered the next question. What's the minimum savings amount for OIMP in the master's stream?
So for a single individual, it's a little over 13,000. I don't remember the exact number, but for a single individual, it's just over 13,000, and then it goes up just depending on the number of family members that you do have.
It's what's called LICO, LICO. And if you Google it, it'll show up on the government websites. Okay.
Elizabeth, what about if we want to do a master's after our bachelor's?
If you want to do a master's after your bachelor's, you may not want to apply for postgrad work. I say may, okay? I can't say for every situation, but oftentimes don't be so eager to apply for a work permit just because you qualify for it, because you only get that one work permit. If you are going to do a master's right after your bachelor's, then you will have wasted the work permit because you can't get points for work experience while you're doing your master's. So for a lot of people, it might be in your best interest to wait to apply for the postgrad work permit until after you finished your master's, and then when you graduate, you apply for your postgrad work permit.
I think this goes back to your next steps, right? When you were saying that, yes, we're talking about general programs and general options, but really to look at what works for you and what would be best in specific individual circumstances. That's where that consultation comes in.
So what about if somebody can't find a job after the study permit expires? What should they think about doing?
There are some ways that we can look at applying for work permit extensions. There's other options. I think in this type of situation, again, you want to have that consultation appointment so we can sit down, go through your background, talk about what your options are to stay in Canada, to apply for your permanent residence, so we can plan that out for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The next question, been working with the same category of study since I came to Canada. So part-time during semesters and full-times in summer. Oh, sorry, I've been working with the same employer since I came to Canada, part-time during the semesters and full-time in the summers. Would it be part of work experience for permanent residence?
It really depends, some things like federal skilled worker class or self-employed artist class, that could count towards it. It depends on the category. Okay. Can a full-time student work both on and off campus? And what should the total hours per week be?
Yes, so you can work both on and off campus. On campus, there's no limitation to your hours. Off campus, the maximum is 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time during any scheduled break. Okay, next question, Elizabeth. So let's see here. Must the work experience, whether full-time or part-time, only be in NOC O, A, or B, or does it have to be related to the type of program in which we've studied?
Sorry, I don't know what happened with my screen just now, but sorry, could you say
the work experience? So basically, is the work experience requirement just that it has to be high skilled for express entry, or does it also have to be related to the type of program that I studied in?
It does not have to be related to the program of study. That's a common misperception. You can look for any sort of work experience as long as you're qualified to do it. So there are some limits on certain kinds of work. For example, you can't, apply work as a lawyer if you don't have a law degree, right? You can't work as a nurse without a license to practice as a nurse. So as long as you're able to do the job, it does not have to be related to your studies. All right. I'm going to be picking through some of these questions because we only have a few, few minutes left. Okay, so in terms of the study permit, they got a shorter expiry. Someone has a shorter expiry date on their study permit than the approved application letter. IRCC says they cannot fix it. Do I have to pay the extension fee to extend my study permit? This is kind of specific. What do you think, Zia?
We can look, I mean, I think there's some instances where you can try and have it amended, but generally, yeah, you'd be looking at doing an extension application. Elizabeth, a question for you. So let's say a full-time student and their spouse comes to Canada, the spouse is working on an open spousal work permit. Can we use that spouse's work experience to apply for permanent residence instead of waiting for the international student to finish their program?
Absolutely. Utilize your spouses. Families work together. If your wife qualifies, and when we do a consultation, we always want to have both partners together on the consultation, because when you're on a study permit, your spouse can work. Oftentimes your spouse might be in a better position to qualify for permanent residence than you. Okay. So one last question. I am at the end of the education year. When should I be starting to work with a lawyer to ensure my postgrad work permit PR applications go smoothly? Should I book a consultation soon to make sure my preparations are enough to apply for postgrad work permit, or is it too early?
If you're in your last semester, it's never too early. I mean, we can always start preparing at any point in time. It just means that it gives you more time and gives us more flexibility in terms of making sure you qualify, making sure you have everything that you need, can walk you through that process. But of course, the application would then be able to be submitted once you've actually completed your program and received the documents from the school.
Yeah, again, what Zia has said, never too early to do a consultation, never too early to plan. Oftentimes we'll do follow-up consultations afterwards, but it saves you a world of headache and time, and in order, if you can plan early to know what you might need afterwards. Okay, guys, that's it for us. We'll be sending you guys the recordings, and all the best with all of your plans and your stay in Canada.
Great. And I just wanted to say thank you, Elizabeth and Zia, for spending time with us this morning and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I think this was very useful. And thank you to all the students who attended as well. And yeah, we'll look forward to getting the recording.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.